Matthieu founded MANHOSIOL, an advisory and investment company based in Paris, advising PE firms and private investors. Matthieu is in charge of the direct and indirect investments of Coller, Entreprendre, privately owned holding of Sonepar, and he sits on various boards and investment committees. And seated opposite him, we have a partner of Coller Capital, responsible for investor relations across Southern Europe and the Middle East. Based in the London office, Gerald joined Coller in 2004. Previously spent 14 years in the investment team, where he was responsible for origination and execution. He is Mr. Gerald Carton.
Do you want to introduce your institution? Maybe?
Well, I think most of it has been said in the introduction. Maybe what I'm doing now, I'm focusing on the advisory activity, but as well on deploying the assets of the holding company and my LP life now, deploying these assets. So those are my main two focuses now.
Great. For those that don't know, Coller Capital is one of the leading private equity, private credit secondaries. Maybe we should sit
with the, yeah, don't hear you.
We have about 30 billion under management. We have offices around the world, based out of London, New York. We have an office in Luxembourg, Hong Kong, Beijing and Seoul. And we've been investing in secondaries for 33 years. So maybe to start with, can you tell us a little bit more about your investment strategy? We've heard a little bit about the climate. This is a challenging time. Can you give us an insight on what you're looking at today?
Yes, being today in deployment phase, starting from scratch, I try to take the opportunities in these very difficult times, with about 60% on the private market being shared between global buyout, more specific infrastructure, green infrastructure, and some part of secondaries as well to accelerate this deployment phase. Because as it was said just before, having cash today is maybe not the best option, so I try to put that cash at work as quickly as possible.
60% is a lot, but you mentioned secondaries. So what is attractive with secondaries? Why should LPs consider allocating secondaries today?
Well, in this deployment phase, secondaries to me brings has several advantages. The first one is to accelerate this deployment. It also gives me an access to a larger number of GPs at one time that obviously I would not directly have access to a diversity of GP that will bring the secondary. It would take a lot more time, probably a lot more investment capacities than what I have, let's be optimistic, today. Tomorrow it will probably be larger, but today. I see also risk reduction in the secondaries. Investing, besides of diversity, investing a little bit later in the assets, hopefully we have a better knowledge on their performances and from inside. So all those aspects help me in this deployment phase, and potentially will remain an important pocket in my investments in the future.
I mean, we hear this a lot. I mean, investing in funds when they're 6, 7, 8 years old is a lot easier in a way, because you can see the assets, you can see what asset performs, you know, how the GPs have carefully constructed their portfolio compared to a primary investment at the very beginning of the fund based on more on the track record, the opportunity set. And I guess, you know, today there are discounts. There are significant discounts available because of the lack of liquidity. Is that something that has influenced you?
I take benefit of this lack of liquidity for others being cash-rich today. This is a great opportunity for me to invest now in this secondary.
You can get it cheaper, right? If you missed a couple of years of fees that the original investors have paid,
yes.
If you can get into the top quartile funds at a significant discount, it is an advantage. And I guess also there's no J-curve. You can get cash back pretty much as soon as you invest.
It's a bit shorter.
Yeah, and I think also it's interesting to see how secondaries have constructed their portfolio. Secondaries can invest in funds in asset classes where we still see a lot of distributions today, despite a reduced M&A activity.
It gives me an access to GPs I would not have.
Exactly. So you have been working with some secondary funds, but the other topic that comes up a lot is private credit. A lot of people are interested in private credit and private credit secondaries. Is that an asset class you've looked into?
This is something I'm looking at, but I've not invested yet in this secondary private debt, private credit. I see all the advantages of the secondary private equity with one uncertainty I'm still exploring is the impact of and the benefit of this discount compared to the gap of interest rates with what we can find now on the market, even with large companies. So.
Yeah, I mean, it was mentioned earlier that on a savings account you can get a certain amount of return, and you know, using the secondaries, you can actually get into private credit funds when they're almost fully invested. You can see, you know, in private credit, there is no upside. There's only downside. You know, it's not equity. You can't make very high multiples. And private credit secondaries, it does allow you to get into the vintages that you may not have captured before at a discount, but also pick the managers that have performed the best. And you can see that when the fund is fully invested.
Yeah, but the private vintages that were on low interest rate compared to what you can get now on investment grade companies, how do you find this interest really?
So most private credit funds that we buy they're floating rate. So we've actually benefited from the fact that rates have gone up. The discount allows us to buy first and second quartile private credit funds and effectively transform them into first decile funds, and avoiding all those funds that, you know, are too risky really. You know, you get the watch list names, you get to see the actual performance of each individual credit, and those that are looking like are more risky, you just avoid. But yes, in terms of the differential, it's floating rates. We benefit from that. And I think that, you know, private credit secondaries, people will say, well, why is it? Why would a CIO decide to sell their performing senior secured private credit exposure? And I guess the reason for this is because the discount is a lot less on senior secured private credit than it is buying top quartile private equity funds today. Yes. But also people need liquidity. And we spoke a little bit earlier about the dilemma. GPs are coming back to market, raising ever greater fund, ever faster. And that's putting pressure on LPs, it's putting pressure on you. But we've also seen roughly $400 billion less distribution in the last 12 months than the previous 12 months. And the 5-year fundraising cycle is much, much shorter, but the holding period of the companies is likely to increase quite substantially. So what's your views on that?
Well, sorry, I don't know the sound. I don't hear you very well. When
okay,
because I have
we're going to get very close.
Sound coming back from the
okay. I was just saying that the lack of liquidity, the shorter fundraising cycles, and the increase in duration,
yes,
that's going to put pressure on LPs, right? If you want to continue to back your managers, how are you thinking about that?
Well, I'm not too constrained on this phase. So honestly, for me, it's more an opportunity as an investor than a constraint.
Yep.
on my side.
Yep.
But I'm probably not in a more in a classical position compared to most LPs.
So GP-led secondaries, have you experienced them? What are your thoughts?
Yes, we're all invested in funds with end of their end of time, difficulties, bad timing. We need to find some liquidity, and obviously the secondary is the best option for us. The continuation funds, I've always found it unclear in terms of regulation, governance. So I've always avoided the continuation funds and preferred the option of a good secondary. Sorry.
It's kind of interesting because the GP-led secondaries have exploded. GPs, if they can, want to keep to their star assets. They want to keep them longer. You know, if you have a star asset and it's over 3 times on your book, and you're absolutely convinced that you can keep it for another 3, 4, 5 years and make another 2 or 3 times, it does give you, as a GP, the GP-led, a liquidity mechanism, but a chance to hold on to your best assets instead of selling them to your competitors.
But it's the rule of the private equity, the constrained timing, and that's why I tend to invest in the very long term. And my option is to stay as long as possible, not looking at the investment in terms of years, but mainly for the next generation and the family in the next generations. Being in the private equity constraint is, for me, probably not the liquidity. The main issue is not the liquidity. It's this timing constraint and the end of life that you'll see in the fund. So difficult to work with this GP constraint.
I mean, we are seeing this. Many GPs have tried to extend the life of their fund. They've tried to raise, longer dated funds, but many LPs want a 10-year fund.
They don't want it. Yes.
No, they don't want it. They want the fund to be invested in 5 years, and in 5 years you return the capital, and you make me 20% plus.
Yeah.
Do you think in this environment, GPs can maintain the returns that they've made in the last 10 years? Do you think with the increase in the whole period of companies and the lack of M&A, it's going to be, what's your views?
Well, I think the LPs that have a real, that really add value and bring additional value to the companies they're invested in, not only working on the leverage that helped them in the past years, will keep their performance. So we are now in a period where we'll see who are the real investors managing their companies, working with the management of their companies, bringing them real additional value, and the ones who are just living on the low interest rates and leverage. It will be an interesting time to see who are the real good ones.
I completely agree. I mean, I saw one of the largest insurance companies, LPs, yesterday. And I was saying to them, if you look at the large buyout funds, the ones that you've been backing for the last 10 years, benefiting from cheap leverage, and with the aim of achieving over 20% net IR consistently, and they were telling me yesterday, we're really focusing on the lower end of the mid-cap buyout companies today because they're cheaper, they don't need as much leverage, and we think that's the best chance for us to maintain the returns. Like you said, really adding value, operational value. One of the things they did say is, bolt-on acquisitions, adding companies is really important to creating that value. Do you see that?
Yeah, see, that's what I'm focusing on when I look at direct primary private equity funds. It's, in the past, what is the value they have created outside of the leverage effect? It's a key element of what I'm looking at.
And it's interesting to see, how they find those bolt-on acquisitions. And but for many, the GP-led secondaries is a way to deliver faster liquidity to their LPs and to keep their star assets across their funds. Give it a little bit more time, but also give carry to the new generation of the people within that team that are effectively leading the companies today. Do you see this as an important part of GP-led, the reassignment of carry and motivating the people actually leading the exits?
Honestly, I don't see it very much from where I am. I regret that we don't find more long-term funds created. Would be even interested in investing more in, I don't know, it's a bad thing for many LPs, but investing in evergreen funds to avoid this issue.
And that's interesting because the last panel spoke a bit about, perpetual funds. But I guess, investors like one capital call, just not multiple capital call, but a single capital call. I'm putting in X amount on this date. But what about liquidity? Do investors also need the chance to exit those funds on a quarterly basis, for example?
Yeah. This is always the issue of this long term. How do you get the liquidity? What are the real rules? And who will be the counterpart of your liquidity? But if you have a good split between liquid investments and private equity investments, you should be able to manage that. That's how I tend to manage it.
I mean, we've seen huge success recently with GPs that have launched evergreen funds. And I guess the assets they've used, the underlying assets is performing real estate, stabilized real estate, performing credit, and they have produced a certain amount of liquidity. But secondaries inherently have a lot more liquidity than investing in just private credit or real estate. So it'll be interesting to see how the market develops in terms of evergreen, and I think that liquidity is absolutely key. Investors should be able to get out every quarter. But also stay in for the 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and benefit the compounding of returns. One of the things that we see from investors is the dollar that you give back to investors, for that same dollar to be invested, there's a gap. There's a gap. You have to wait until the next fund is raised and start calling capital. But I guess in your situation, you want that capital to be always invested.
I want it to be called as quickly as possible, and as I said at the beginning, this is why I push as much as I can the investment in secondary for our holding.
What are your predictions for the next 10 years? What do you see in this as part of the portfolio, as part of the private equity market? What are the key trends that you anticipate?
I think we're in as everyone knows, we're in a world that has never been so uncertain, with a number of potential crises that has never been so high, and the stability of the long-term investment and the stability of the private market should allow us to reduce the volatility linked to the risk that is and the uncertainties. So I think there is a great potential for the development of this private market for all the investors who want to get more stability.
I think a key part of that is secondaries. I mean, if you look at the statistics, over the last 20 years, 9% of buyout funds have lost money, and 1% of secondary funds have lost money, and gives back the money quite quickly. And I think that, when I think of the next 10 years, I think this is still the very beginning of secondaries. I think secondaries will massively grow in market share, just like you've seen in other asset classes. When there's a large underlying primary market, there is a secondary market. And most of the real estate you see here in Luxembourg, it's secondaries.
Yeah.
Matthieu, thank you very much.
Thank you.